And just the amount of research I put into the decisions I make is stupid. It is really dumb. And I cannot defend it. It is just the way I am.
Welcome to episode 7 of Chasing Passion. What are we doing on this show? I find some of the coolest people that I know that are just everyday people that have done amazing things from start to finish. And they kind of lay it out for you how they did it and what their mindset is. And if you're feeling like you don't know how to get from A to B, these people have actually built things. I've had a variety of different people on this show. I've had people that have recorded music albums. I've had people that have done video editing, people that have had short stories published. And today I have one of my old friends, another one that I haven't talked to fully in a really, really long time, Cameron Johnson. And I brought you on today because as somebody that works in the culinary industry, I did some digging and found out that you opened your own brewery and that you had all these different beers and that you did the entire thing by yourself. And that to me is really, really, really overwhelming just to think about it as an entire project, let alone individual components. So I kind of wanted to dive into that with you today.
Yeah,
So
sounds
let's
good.
start off with the beginning before you even brewed your first beer and what pulled you initially from what you were doing into brewing specifically.
Well, the fault in my addiction to beer, it's a healthy addiction though. I haven't needed treatment yet. Has to be my in-laws. So my father-in-law is a big craft beer fan and has been for a long while. And they bought me my first homebrewing kit when I was still in grad school for architecture.
Wow.
So I was working on my degree there in Spokane, and my wife and I had just got our first apartment there, and very limited space. But I broke open that little kit and was brewing on the stove. And after my first 2.5 gallon batch using extract, my next batch was a partial mash, which is a mix of extract and grain, which is like the next little step up. And the next batch after that was 5 gallons all grain. And then the next batch after that was, I think, 7.5 gallons all grain. And I dove into it head first. I loved it right away.
It clearly just began to get more and more serious as each
Yeah,
batch just went on. It actually kind of answers an early question that I had written down was I didn't really know much about the beer making process prior
mm,
to talking to you, even though I'm an industry guy. And so someone posed an interesting question to me for you that I was talking to at work, which was why didn't you deviate off and do whiskey as opposed to doing beer?
sure. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of everything fermented. I didn't do nearly as much chemistry and biology in college as I would have liked now that I am in the brewing world. So I kind of forced myself to learn that along the way. Got books from the library on organic chemistry and brewing science books, and just forced myself to learn things as much as I could. So I've dove into all aspects of fermentation. I haven't done distilling, which is what you do to make spirits, and then to do whiskeys or bourbons or ports, you then barrel age them.
Sure.
So those I haven't done. Home distilling is illegal in the United States. Not to say that people don't do it, and I have no qualms against it, but it was just nothing I had branched into.
Sure.
And honestly, I always enjoyed beer more. I enjoy the aroma and the flavor and being able to drink more than just 4 ounces of it at a time.
Sure.
Um,
So, how did
yeah.
you? So you told me off camera, and then now we're recording. You told me that you got your master's degree in architecture.
Yep.
How did you utilize that in your business ventures down the road?
So the idea of brewing as a source of revenue for me wasn't something that was initially part of my conceptualization of brewing. I was just doing it as a hobby. I was doing it because I loved it. I was a member of the local homebrewing club. Did some talks there, did some talks at conferences, did presentations. I just loved learning about it and teaching other people everything I knew about it.
Sure.
And there's, just like in any industry, there's always more to learn. There's always new research coming out, especially in the craft brew world. It's such a burgeoning area of industry in the US right now, and it has been for the past 30 years. So after I got my master's in architecture, I started working at a firm in Spokane.
Sure.
Doing residential design, specializing in sustainable design. I did that for just over a year, and then got an offer to work with another architect that did high-end custom homes.
Wow.
In the area. So went to work with him, and again, just about a year. And then a local developer and real estate agency owner found me through the local homebrewing clubs and publications, and approached me with this idea he had of opening an incubator brewery space. So this was going to be modeled after the tech incubators of Silicon Valley, where you provide the space and the equipment, and you bring people in, and you let them use that area to develop their own business for a low rent, low capital investment.
That's really
in
cool.
exchange for equity interest in the company.
That's
And then
really
when
cool.
you assist them in everything from their initial business plan to operations within the space, and then moving out to their own location.
Sure. So that branches off two questions for me. The first one being, what part of your philosophy growing up and just in your life in general has allowed you to be so detail oriented? Because a lot of the things that you're doing are just minute adjustments, and you
Yeah.
know, and I think you were talking about this a few minutes earlier, where you just like, you made a batch, then you made another batch, and you made an adjustment, and then you made another batch. What is it from even childhood that allows you to like think that way?
I don't know. It's probably a mix of some kind of sensitivity to design and just sometimes crippling OCD.
That's actually really true.
And I think anybody in the design world, whether you're designing beer or buildings or anything in between, you have some semblance of OCD, or at least a compulsive desire to fine tune things and make sure they're as good as they can be, because all design is art in one way or another, and art is an iterative process. You constantly reinterpret and reinvent, and you take on new sources of inspiration and you reinterpret and reinvent. And that kind of process always really intrigued me, the idea that you can always make something better, you can always do it better or learn more. And so that's what initially drew me into architecture. That path was kind of very set from early on. In 6th grade at North Whitby Middle School,
Yeah.
I don't remember the circumstances of it, but I had the opportunity to either take another PE course, or I could do an elective like technical drawing or something else.
Sure.
And my mom saw technical drawing on there and was like, well, you should try this. Several people in our family have been engineers or architects or whatever, and I had no previous interest in it. But from the first day, I just fell in love with being able to take what I was seeing and create a new version of that, be able to take outside inspiration and create my own drawing, or just see something in front of me and be able to draw it in different views and different axonometric layouts. And so from 6th grade on, I took either a technical drawing course or CAD or 3D design course all the way through my senior year of high school. And
Wow.
so I knew from sixth grade on that I wanted to be an architect.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting thing when I have worked with a lot of different chefs over the course of my life, and I ran into this chef who I work with now, and I'm still close friends with him. And he, when he came in, he had this really high quality level of work, and he had a very detail oriented focus. And I remember, I think partially maybe because I wasn't uh, as into it as he was. It was very frustrating for me because he has that spectrum of OCD of like
Hmm.
put something out, make an adjustment, no, this isn't right. And like I remember thinking in my head like it doesn't really matter. Like just put it where it needs to go. But I had to respect the work that he was doing because it did always, like, he does some of the best parties that I've ever seen. And it is an interesting thing, like when you're naturally into something, but also doubled with the fact that you have an attention to detail, like you're just in the zone, like you're really
Yeah.
just not, nothing else is going on around you. And I remember that from my line cooking days when I was on a really hot line. When you start getting into it and you're really into the process, you're just looking and nothing else is going on. You're just looking at the details of what's going on, and it's hard to like it's hard to teach someone how to do that. Like it's hard to teach someone how to think that way. I think you just have to have a natural curiosity in the thing that you're doing. Otherwise, you're just gonna not care that much, and you're just gonna say, "I'm kind of disinterested in what's going on right now." So my
Sure.
my second question to you is, as this began to grow from a kind of a hobby that you were doing in your living room into an actual business, and you began to meet people and you began to join clubs and get involved in the community, my next question to you is, how important would you say that networking and building a community and interacting with people in and around the industry was to your overall success?
It's critical.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely critical component
Yeah.
to success in an industry, and kind of as a self-regulating mechanism, as a
Sure.
check to make sure that not only are you dedicated to that industry or succeeding in that world, uh, but building those connections and making sure that you're constantly reevaluating how you're doing.
Sure. Yeah.
There's always going to be somebody better than you, right?
Yeah.
And my goal is always to get to that person that's better than me that I admire, and then look for the next one.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, you sometimes you see it played off kind of cheesy in movies a little bit, but like there really is something about like having a natural sense of competition and
Hmm.
having like someone like a healthy, like fair competition with someone so that you can say, "Oh, what are they doing over there? I have respect for what they're doing and I'll make adjustments." Because I would notice a lot of trends within the culinary industry, like somebody over here is using a lot of foam for a few years, and then everybody was using poached eggs on everything for a few years, and then
Yep.
everything was about kale for a few years, and like everybody's just trying, and it's good for you. It's like it's how something improves, and it's also how like you develop yourself because you're developing through your work. I talked with somebody else on an earlier episode, and he was talking about his journey of writing music, and it was the same idea, like as your work develops, you develop as an individual through your work because you're putting yourself out there.
Yeah,
So,
if you're working in a bubble, you can very easily just get stagnant, just get comfortable. And pulling yourself out of your comfort zone, working with new things, looking at trends and seeing why they're working the way they do and how other people are working with them really helps build your own skill set.
well, yeah, I mean, I would say there's a lot of times people get to a certain place in their life and they think to themselves, like, I'm staying stable, but they're not really factoring in the fact that they're getting older and like that the time. So, like, even though it feels like you're on the same wavelength and you're operating the same way you've been operating for 10 years, like the business is still going on around you, beyond you, and you're getting older. And if you aren't keeping up on those skills, like, you're just not going to know. Like, things are changing so rapidly now with everything, and especially with tech getting involved with things, and then that creates a thousand new like options for you that you can expand. Oh, I could use this tool and make this thing that I've never made before. So I think it's
Mhm.
super important to keep yourself involved with the people around you.
And at the very least, it helps you to make sure that you are doing what you want to be doing,
Yeah.
that you are being true to the vision of your business or your hobby or your expression, whatever it may be. Looking at new trends is not only a way of expanding your own talents, but reassuring yourself of where you exist within that milieu.
Yeah. That's
Because it, new new for newness' sake is just silly, right? Uh,
that's true. It's
there
a
has to be a reason that you're changing something from the past. Everything changes. Changes is a factor we all have to deal with, but there is something to be said for classic dishes in French cuisine or classic beer styles. They exist because they are good and they took hundreds, if not thousands, of years to perfect. And
It's true.
learning those base techniques is just like learning any industry or any degree track that you're on. You start with a basis of where that industry has come from, the history that has built it into what it is today, so that you can understand where you fit within that.
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad that you said that because I couldn't agree with you more. I feel like sometimes you meet people that are fresh into an industry or they're new and they think that they're being innovative, and it's not judgmental, it's more observational. They think that they're being innovative, but the reality is that they haven't learned the fundamentals. Like, and the fundamentals is like you were saying about certain techniques. Like, there's a reason why they've lasted as long as they've lasted is because they're essential and they're a building block, and you build on top of those as your skills expand, but you have to kind of know the fundamentals before you can even think to just change something just for the sake of changing it. So I would totally agree with you.
Right. And in any design world, in the art world, it's all creative stealing is the usual kind moniker for it, right? So like in architecture especially, excuse me, in architecture especially, design is not new. We're all reinterpreting things that have been done before, and we're using either new materials or new construction techniques or new software to put our own spin on it. And it's like that in any creative industry.
Sure.
So if somebody is coming in without that knowledge of what has come before and they're focused on innovation and doing these new things, oftentimes they are inadvertently creating something that has already been created. And
It's true.
that is one of the biggest learning points for me, because I often am so focused on looking forward that I forget to look at what has come before.
Sure.
And I'll be working on like a new beer recipe design, and then I'll start looking through some history books, or brewing style books, and see that that style and the perfection of that actually originated in southern Germany in the 1200s. And
Yeah,
I'm
that's
like,
awesome.
oh,
Yeah,
well,
someone's
yeah,
already done
uh,
that.
there isn't really anything new. It's just reinterpretations.
I love that. So it brings me to kind of my next question to you, which is more of an opinion question for you, which is what are your what I don't quite understand what happened because it feels like to me with all of the new beers in the grocery store and all of the obsession right now with IPAs, and it seems like over the last 5 years, like there was like 12 beers, and now at least for me, it's like there's at least 100. Like you go into just a regular QFC and they have an entire aisle dedicated to all different kinds of beers. Like what do you think maybe from your inside knowledge of how that came about?
Well, to relate it back to the culinary world that you're more familiar with, um, chefs like Sean Brock or David Chang,
Hmm?
they're not doing new things, especially Sean Brock. He is looking to the past. He is looking at seed saving and local heirloom varietals that were almost lost and are only grown on a couple farms in Louisiana. And so these beer styles are the same way. We haven't really created any new beer styles in the past 15 years, with a few exceptions here and there. And it's arguable that those styles are simply reinterpretations of styles that have come before.
Yeah.
So all the options you see now in the store are not that they weren't there before. It's just that there wasn't the customer demand for the grocery store or the bottle shop to carry them. And the fact that bottle shops, specialty beer stores exist now, everything from Total Wine down to your neighborhood store with a boutique selection of Belgian beers, those all existed before, but there just wasn't the demand in the US to bring those in and to feature them.
Sure.
Another interesting statistic is the number of breweries in the US right now. So we surpassed 7,000 craft breweries in the US at the end of 2018, I believe. But the number of breweries we had in the US before Prohibition was about 5,500.
Wow.
So right around like 2016 is when we surpassed the number of breweries that there were in the US pre-Prohibition. And that was with like a quarter of the population that we have in the US now.
Interesting.
So the desire for beer has always been there. I mean, people have been making beer for about 5,500 years, depending on what history you're reading. And these styles have always been there, whether they've been recorded or not, or whether they've existed for a few hundred years and then died out and then come back. They've been there. We're just at a point in our culture, specifically in the US right now, where we have this hunger for new in every industry. We want new food, new techniques of making food, new beer styles, new ways to jump on the river. I mean, we have stand-up paddle boards now, and we didn't have those 15 years ago. So there's just this cultural desire for new all the time, right? New iPhones every year. And so that has fueled this growth in craft beer, just like it has in every other industry.
Sure.
It's just that it's being expressed more visually and in your face when you go to the grocery store in the world of craft beer.
Yeah, I mean, I have to compliment you because it's like been already like super insightful, and I've already been super enjoying talking to you because you have like a lot of really good insights and things that I hadn't thought about, and it seems like you do have a deep appreciation for like the fundamentals and classics and understanding history and where everything came from. And it's something that I've been kind of on a kick lately because I think I was kind of disrespectful for a long time of like kind of being like, oh, we don't need that. Oh, they didn't do anything that we don't like, just being kind of arrogant in that way. And
we're all like that. Yeah.
And then like maybe it's just part of being in your 20s. And like
Sure.
just being like, I already know what I'm doing. Like, I don't need you to tell me. But then as like, especially having a kid and realizing how little that I know about everything,
Yeah.
as my kid reminds me all the time of everything I don't know, it's helpful for me to like meet people that have a deep respect for tradition and for just studying history and for studying the past. And so like, kudos to you. So I would say my next question is, you created a brewery out in Spokane before it became an incubator space. It was a brewery. It was your brewery.
No, the original intent was that it would be an incubator space.
Interesting.
So we started, as I said, the landlord approached me with this concept.
Sure.
And the only reason I left the architecture world and jumped into professional brewing, regardless of how much I loved it. I mean, I was sitting at my desk doing architecture and listening to brewing podcasts 8 hours a day, every day.
Wow.
But I knew that I wasn't going to leave a steady job to try to make professional brewing work without any kind of business knowledge, without any kind of capital investment that I wasn't taking out a huge loan for.
Yeah.
And so this investor came to me and said that he was willing to fully fund the whole thing and he had a building that was ready to be renovated.
Wow.
So he had this idea to make it this rotating space of bringing new breweries in and moving them out to their own space, and a new brewery fills their spot, and then you move that one out, and that's very much like the iterative process of any design field.
Wow.
So this concept was not only to grow the craft beer scene of Spokane, which in late 2015, early 2016 was still very nascent. It wasn't like Portland or Seattle. The Spokane craft beer scene up until 2014 was pretty much one large brewery that had been an offshoot of an old brewery in the area from the 80s.
Wow.
And then right around 2014, 2013, we saw three craft breweries open up. And they were pretty limited in terms of production and sales because that area, there just wasn't demand for craft beer. It was kind of a conservative area, but Spokane is this island in the middle of wheat fields. It's the biggest city between Seattle and Minneapolis along I-90,
Yeah,
and it
you're
is.
not. Yeah, you're definitely not lying about that. I took a trip about 3 weeks ago. I haven't spent a lot of time in Eastern Washington, but I took a trip. I don't remember the town off the top of my head, but it's kind of irrelevant because it was like two streets and it was and there's really like nothing out there. And like it's sometimes I think hard for people that are in cities to really conceptualize, but to give you like I drove over the mountains and then we were driving to my wife's uncle's place, and he's fully self-sufficient. Like they have all their own chickens and they do all their fishing and fruit harvesting and growing, and they have all that stuff. And I knew that I was
uh,
not in a place I was used to when I was driving down a back road highway and like, I don't know, six turkeys just ran across the road just on their own. They just were there, like they owned the place. And then I looked around and I said, there's nothing out here. Like there's
yeah,
really like it's just pasture land and like hills, and that's it, man.
yeah.
So
So
yeah,
everything that's around Spokane is wheat and barley fields. That's the one of the primary industries of Eastern Washington,
interesting.
is grain farming. Spokane, in and of itself, is a pretty old city. It's situated along uh, I-90 and along the railroad there that connected the East Coast all the way to New York to Seattle. And the World's Fair in like 78
Yeah.
was in Spokane.
Wow.
So it's been a city on the map for a long time, but it exists in this isolated bubble because it is relatively remote.
Yeah.
So part of the goal of opening the incubator was to help grow business and specifically the brewing industry in the inland Northwest.
Sure.
So that incubator concept was there from the beginning.
Sure.
And we had the idea that you would be in the incubator for 2 or 3 years, building up your business plan, your skill in using professional scale equipment, your local accounts, and then move out to your own space. Somebody else would fill your spot in the incubator, and the cycle would continue.
Sure.
So we planned to have 5 brewers in there at a time initially, 5 separately licensed. We then scaled that back to 3 because 5 businesses operating within the brewery is about 1,200 square feet. So it's pretty
Wow.
small.
Yeah.
It was just too much. So we have 3 that operate in there at any given time.
Wow.
And we assist with everything from your initial business plan all the way through getting you into the space, brewing, and then after 2 or 3 years, moving you out to your own space. So we've been open since the summer of 2016,
Sure.
and we've moved out 1 brewer so far. I guess if you count myself as well, I have moved on, not moved out to my own space. And we have 3 operating breweries in there right now who are in varying states of getting ready to move out.
Wow, that's pretty. I just think I wasn't before I talked to you. I wasn't aware that that's what the situation was, but it actually is even cooler. it's an even cooler concept than what I had originally thought. Like you owning your own brewery is cool, but like this whole idea of building up the community and networking with people and like doing the infrastructure
Yeah,
is way cooler. Is just
that's
is
the critical component, because like owning a business is kind of overly romanticized, especially in this millennial era. Like everybody who has 5,000 Instagram followers thinks they're an influencer and can go and make money on YouTube or whatever. And
yeah,
in some cases, you can, sure, if you're passionate enough about it and you market yourself well and you have a solid idea of where you're going, sure, yeah, more power to you. But owning a business is, especially in a brewery, it's so much more than the product.
yeah.
Like the amount of time I spent brewing when I worked in and owned a professional brewery was maybe 10% of my time. The rest of the time was cleaning, it was marketing, it was trying to sell my product. Because even if you make the best product in the world, whether it's beer or, I don't know, Parmesan cheese, you have to market it. You have to tell people why they need it, and you have to have either a really, really good personality for doing that or find somebody who does. And it's usually better to find somebody who
Yeah,
does.
that's true.
So the the focus of the incubator was never to make money. Doing it at that scale and in that small of a space, you're not going to make money.
Sure.
The idea was you keep your day job and you kind of test the waters to see if turning your hobby that you're obsessed with into a profession is something that you can make viable and something that you really want to do. You know, from working in a kitchen, it's not all using tweezers and organizing heirloom flowers on a plate.
Well,
It's
when you were just talking right there, the thing I was thinking in my head was from a culinary perspective, the further up you get and the more responsibility that you get, the less cooking you're doing. I mean, you have the
right.
clipboard, you're doing the schedule, you're looking at the ordering, you're, organizing things. You're more of a delegator and making sure that all of the cogs and the pieces are where they're supposed to be so that
Yep.
the people that can do the job can do the job. And yeah, the more pressure that's on you, typically the further and further away from the actual production of the product you are. So, I mean, I definitely found that highly, highly
Yeah.
relatable.
It's the same in any industry, I
Yeah,
think, but it was especially prevalent in the brewing world. And so I sometimes advise people that talk to me, hey, I found your incubator online. I'd love to start brewing there. I get probably one of those emails a month.
sure,
I would say 1 in 20 turn out to be somebody who actually moves into the incubator.
sure.
And then I sometimes like advise people, if they're on the fence, just if you're just really passionate about making beer and you don't want to turn it into a business, just keep homebrewing. Just keep
Yeah,
it a hobby, because then you can just focus on the creative aspect. The first thing that goes out the door when you make it a business is creativity, because you have to make it profitable. A business has to make money. That's how businesses work. If it's not making money, it's a hobby.
yeah. I mean,
And that's fine. But
this is so important. Like what all these things that you've been saying over like the last 5 minutes or so, uh, I think is just really resonates with me in the sense that you really did think a lot of things right within your life in the sense that you had this hobby and like you said, I mean, you used the words, you were testing the waters, and I think that there's a lot that can be said of that. You push something as far as you're going to push it and you see if you enjoy it. But you're right, if you enjoy the process of making something, you should probably just like keep making it and enjoy that you're making it and enjoy being in that, because you, you are right. The minute it becomes a business, you can't be as romantic about what you're doing in the sense that you have no choice but to look at it from a business perspective and say how can I move units, and it does really become about moving units. It's I meet people sometimes that are really good home cooks, and
Hmm.
they this is a prime example where there'll be a really good home cook and they really enjoy spending 2 hours in an evening working on this meal really delicately, and then they people will say to them, oh, that have never worked in the industry, they'll say, oh, well, you should go be a chef, and you're thinking to yourself, and I'll
How long did
say,
it take you to prep your Mirepoix?
yeah,
It
exactly. Like if
took
you
30 minutes. That should be done in two.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. It's different. It's not, you have to understand that if you take that love of putting things delicately on the plate, like unless you're getting into a place where, where did I go for dinner for my wedding anniversary? Oh, we went up to Lumi Island and we ate at Lumi Island, and that's one of those rare places where, like you're in the upper echelon and you're at this place
Hmm.
that would be considered a Michelin star place, and the people live there and they forage the island and they're living, but that's, most places are not that way, and it
Right.
really takes a lot of networking and working for free and building up your resume
Hmm.
to even get in the door to wash dishes at those places,
Right. And it's
so
it's it's not that there's this giant dichotomy between creativity and profitability. They can mesh together and they should. But creativity, like we said before, you don't need to be creative for the sake of creativity. Your creativity or your care into making any product should be part of your business plan. I
yeah.
mean, nobody opens a business with the idea that, oh, I'm going to make shitty products and I'm going to sell them to Walmart and that's going to be fantastic. Well, I mean, there's Dollar Tree, so they probably kind of have that model, but they're a reseller, right?
Yes.
They're not a
Well,
creator.
they're a middleman
They're
for
they're
sure.
doing they're doing high volume, low margin.
Sure.
Whereas anybody opening a small business that is focused on a craft where you are perfecting some kind of product or process is the opposite. They're low volume, high margin.
Yes, that's
And
exactly
you
right.
need to make that business plan work for you.
Yeah.
And you need to make sure that you are going into it with the right mindset that I will focus on quality above all else, but at the end of the day, it is a business and it does need to make money. And if this is my only source of revenue, it really has to make money to support me and whatever family I have. So I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom and say that when you open a business, you can't do cool things anymore. You can't make unique products or you can't push the envelope and push boundaries, but it has to be within an overarching mindset of this is how the business is going to run and this is why.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. You have to be willing to accept a certain quality of life, and you have to be, you're right, because your comments about low volume, high margin is exactly right. The more and more and more energy you put into perfecting something, just by the very nature of the system itself, the less you're going to produce. Because that's the whole point of producing something over and over and over again to get it right, is you're going to have a limited number of them and you're going to have really high margins for it. So, I mean, I think the point is really like, as long as you're willing to accept the conditions within a certain framework, then it's fine. But you have to understand, the higher volume that you get, the less and less creativity is really going to, that you're really going to directly have on the product itself, just by the
Right.
very nature of it.
You're
So
either going to be hiring somebody else to be creative for you or to just do the work where you have been creative in the past
yeah,
and then you find your own outlets for creativity.
sure. Yeah, I agree. So I have a couple more questions,
Hmm?
and my next question would be, how do you personally, like doing the things that you did in exploring kind of this thing, were kind of risky in a certain way,
Hmm.
where whether it was just your reputation or, whether you were afraid that you were going to get, burnt out from your hobby, or any number of potential fears that you could have had going into it. How did you personally deal with the fear, your various fears, and push forward to actually do the project itself, as opposed to go, you know what, like maybe I shouldn't do this.
Right. I do tend to be somewhat risk averse sometimes, or maybe a better way of phrasing it is that I tend to overanalyze a lot, and I think that's part of the OCD nature that I that I
Yeah,
live with and enjoy actually.
yeah,
Um, so, for example, like when I go to buy something like let's say it's a new car, the amount of hours that I spend researching that car and every aspect about that car and how an electric battery works. And then I dive down a Wikipedia hole of how aluminum air batteries work. And just the amount of research I put into the decisions I make is stupid. It is really dumb. And I cannot defend it. It is just the way I am. I overanalyze pretty much every decision I make. And so when I went into this idea of professional brewing, the thing that immediately intrigued me, not only about being able to open my own commercial brewery and have people pay me to taste the product that I'm already making and enjoying, was that my risk was very low. So the investor who approached me was willing to fully fund the whole thing. So my initial capital investment for setting up my business in the professional brewery world, setting up a 7-barrel brewery. So a barrel is 31 gallons. So we brew about 220 gallons at a time.
Yeah.
So that's 14 full-size kegs. Setting up a brewery like that is, after you factor in your initial capital investment, your float cash to get you through the first year, your insurance, your renovation costs, the cost of equipment, the cost of your first few batches of product, marketing, all those things, you're looking at probably around 400,000 on average. Yeah. And it can certainly be higher. 400,000 is kind of middle of the road. You can do it cheaper, you can do it more expensive, just like in any industry.
Right.
So this place I was able to set up with $15,000 of my own cash.
That's amazing.
So way, way cheaper because the landlord took on all of the initial risk, financially speaking. So yeah, I had other risk areas. Like I knew it was going to take a lot of my time. But that was before we had kids, so I could afford the time, relatively speaking. I don't tend to sleep very much. I get like 4 to 6 hours a night usually.
That's true.
I don't sleep well, and I can't shut my brain off sometimes, which probably ties into that OCD nature. Sure. But I knew that I could make the time. Sure. I could find time when I didn't want to be hanging out with my wife or doing other things in the professional world, and I could get this set up. I could make it work. And so I started researching everything that I could about setting up a business and specifically setting up a craft brewery. Yeah. And it was daunting at first. It really was. It was kind of a what did I get myself into kind of moment. Yeah. You have to just kind of focus on forcing yourself to learn the jargon of the industry you're getting into, whether that's legal, financial, or otherwise. And so I just forced myself to read and read and read and listen to podcasts, and I just absorbed as much information as I could to the point where I felt confident that I could at least not lose money in this. And that's how it ran. I didn't make much money, but I certainly didn't lose money.
Yeah. I mean, I think that last, as you were like kind of collecting the thought at the very end, I think that's a super important point, which is the more that you know about a specific topic, the less chances there are, just by the very nature of it, that something's going to go wrong, because something will come up and you'll say, oh, well, I have the answer to that, or like, oh, I know the answer to that, like, because you've been reading,
or at least you know what to expect.
Sure.
Even if you don't have the answer.
Sure. And yeah, it could branch. You're like, one of these two things could happen, and if we get there, then I'll respond this way. It just gives you more and more options. I think a lot of times people find themselves in a place where they're just like so overwhelmed with the amount of choice. I know that with the amount of choice being the amount of things that could happen to them,
Hmm.
that they just kind of get shut down. I know that I get that way sometimes. I know, like, raising a kid, it's that way sometimes, where just like so many things could happen, and then I have to go read, and I go get some books, or I order some books on Amazon and spend my nights reading and trying to learn,
Hmm.
and it really has helped like cure some of my anxiety, is just gathering information. I would say I
And
have.
that, if I could interrupt real quick, that being said, the learning as much as you can is always valuable. I am a big fan of education in every form, and believe that it's always valuable. There's never a downside to learning new things.
That's true.
But at a certain point, which is very difficult for me, you have to learn to let go a bit, and you have to learn to look at things efficiency wise and say, maybe I shouldn't be my own accountant. Maybe I
Yep.
shouldn't do night classes at the community college to learn how to do my own books correctly. It would probably be a more efficient use of my time and money to have somebody who is a CPA do that for me, and I can focus on creating this
That's a
product, which is
smart
what I
way to
really
say it.
love about this
Yeah,
industry.
that's smart.
So and that should be part of your initial conception of your business about how it's going to work and how it's going to run, whether it's a business or not. I know I keep referring back to the business world, but whatever it is you're doing, there are only so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
And for a work-life balance, regardless of how much you love something, and for efficiency's sake, sometimes you have to let go of certain aspects to have somebody else do them so that you can focus on the part that you are really passionate about and or really good at.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, this is just, I'm so I'm so happy with the conversation, because you just say a lot of things that I think about a lot and that I believe in, and you have a really elegant way of articulating them and bringing
Well,
them
I'm
all.
really just reading from an ebook right now. It's on the screen here. It's been really helpful.
I love it, dude. So my last two questions for you, and then we'll wrap this up because it is getting late for both of
Yeah.
us. My last two questions are, number one, oh man, I lost it. How no, okay, here they are. Sorry. My last two questions
42.
are, yeah. Number one, how has having children, because you have two kids,
Uh-huh.
how has, I love how you had to think about that for a second.
Yeah.
How
Yep.
has
They're both
ha-
still breathing. Yeah, they're
how
good.
has having children, going from being having this business and then having children, how has it emotionally impacted the way you look at the world and impacted your life personally?
Um, so kids are wonderful, beautiful little monsters, and they require a lot of work, and you are never prepared for it. And every day is a new a new wonderful disaster. Um, so I wouldn't say that having kids directly changed the way that I felt about my business or about any creative outlet that I have. It just refocused where I valued my split of time. So I would much rather be at home with my family than in the brewery working um, or planning some new recipe or going to a brewing conference. Not that I don't enjoy those things, but my primary focus is my family. I would say probably even more so now that I have kids than before. I mean, before I had all of this, I had my wife all to myself, right? She wasn't mom. She was just my best friend, and we could hang out all the time whenever.
Yeah,
And then when we had kids, that changes, right? You're a parent first, and then you get to hang out and have fun with each other later.
yeah,
Um, so having kids didn't change the way I felt about brewing. It was just the amount of time I was willing to dedicate to it. And so you make the time
yeah,
in other ways. If you really value something, you eat while you're reading a book,
yeah.
or you listen to a podcast about something you really enjoy while you're driving to and from work. you find ways to make time work for you more efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's probably my biggest takeaway as being a new dad is I never realized, even with working all the time, which was what I was doing, I never realized how much time I had and how efficient I could get with my time
Oh yeah.
until having kids, until having my son. Because, now I meet people sometimes that don't have kids and they're like, "Oh, I'm so tired from an 8-hour day," and I'm
Yeah.
up at 5 in the morning, getting ready to go in the car to school, to home. Like every minute of the day is budgeted for something, and then if I have an hour like I have right now, like, and I can stay up for it, like I used to
Hmm.
laugh at all these parents. It's like, "Oh, you're asleep by 9 o'clock, or you don't want to go out." And it's like, I totally understand why you're that way because
Yeah.
you're just so exhausted all
Yeah.
the time in a good way, like a way where you
Hmm.
feel like you're feeling fulfilled and you
Yeah.
feel
Exactly.
like you're being productive in the world and you know that you're squeezing life for every single second that you can get out of it. So I would
Yeah.
say that that is definitely my biggest insight uh, into
Yeah.
having
It's
kids as well.
it's not that one lifestyle or one mindset is any better than the other. It's just different,
Yeah.
and we mature and we change. And like when I think back now at all the time that I wasted in college,
Yeah,
I
me
mean, I
too.
went to all my classes and I got good grades because I've always been very academically focused. That's been drilled into my head since kindergarten. Um, but the amount of time you spend in class in college is even less than high school. Like each day I was in class maybe on a long day, 5.5 hours. And I look at that now and I'm like, what did I do with the rest of my day?
I don't know. I don't know what I did
I
with
could have
mine
been doing
either.
so many
Yeah,
things.
I
I could
to
have been
I to
learning
reading, studying,
biochemistry
yeah, anything.
on in my free time, but no, other things were more important, I guess. Like
Sleeping
when my
and
now wife was just my girlfriend, spending every moment with her, I guess, was more important. But whatever.
so that's so funny. So let's end the show with this. The last question will be what advice or feedback would you have to somebody who maybe is like in their late teens or early 20s who doesn't really have a clear path cut out for them yet? And, I think that, you had engineering and architecture running in your family, so there was already that thread of that there. But what would you've tasted something that you were passionate about and you know what that's like now and you've had, your sometimes I think that we in our 30s forget that like kids that are 16 are half our age and we're already really there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
Thank you for
know.
reminding me. That's very kind.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
Anytime you need a refresher, you just text me.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
what
I'm
feedback
just
would
gonna
you
go rub some Bengay on my joints.
do 2 hours of stretching before bed?
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Well, I guess I would preface it with maybe I'm not the best one to ask about that. In many ways, I had it kind of easy. Um, Not only did I have a family that supported me emotionally and financially into college, but I had my career trajectory picked out from when I was 12 years old.
Sure.
And I worked on that until I was 18. When I was 16, I knew which colleges I was going to apply to. I had the luxury of being really good at standardized testing, probably again somewhat related to my OCD nature. So I applied to 8 different places and got accepted to 8 different places and got scholarship offers, and it was all very easy.
Sure.
Things just kind of fell into place, and I just kept going along that path. That whatever fell into place was just where I went. I
Sure.
didn't really challenge that too much. I knew my conceptualization of what I wanted to do and where I was going to end up, and I just went along there. Not to say that I didn't work hard, I did, but a lot of things just fell into place. So that was a big luxury. And Very few people have that luxury.
Sure.
That being said, the transition from the academic world into the working world in any industry is usually a pretty big letdown. You go from, and again, this is coming across as very negative, but I promise there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Um, it's usually a big letdown. You go from this ivory tower, this environment of being focused on the craft, right, on the process and learning and ignoring practicality. In architecture, when you're working on design projects, you don't worry about if it can be built or how much it's going to cost. You're not looking at budgets and lead times. You're just focused on design and how does this design work? How does it better the built environment or people's interactions with the environment? How does it create new spaces and new opportunities for interactions? And then you get into the professional world, and day one, you are looking at bathroom details and making sure that the correct dimensions are on the drawing for ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. Nothing against them, but you're making sure that your bathroom handrail is exactly at 42 inches, and then there's another one below that at 36 inches, so the grip area is right, and that's what you do for 8 hours a day. And it is just soul crushing sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get into a job right out of your education, or maybe not out of education, that is just everything you dreamed it would be.
Sure.
But there are always those elements of being rooted in the real world and practicality and profitability that take away from that creative aspect. And that's why we as humans have hobbies, I think. That's why we focus on small things that we're passionate about and work on them on the small scale, is that's our creative outlet. That's our brain's way of being able to ignore the world around us and get in the zone, as you said.
Yeah.
Focus on just making what's in front of you exactly what you want it to be. Whether
Yeah.
it's a drawing or a clay pot or a dish or a beer, whatever, you we as humans delight in creating new things and making them what we want to be. We alter our surroundings in one way or another, and we always have. And being able to find that passion in whatever you're doing, whether you're stuck in a fluorescent lit small office staring at a screen for 8 hours a day, or whether you are a photographer who gets paid to travel the world for Time magazine, you find your creative outlet in those small moments where you can be in control of everything in your immediate surroundings.
Yeah. I mean, that's
And being able to translate that into a business is the ultimate sense of satisfaction in my mind,
yeah. I mean,
at least for me.
I would say that I agree with you. I would say that I've noticed lately that I was really motivated when I went to Eastern Washington and I saw uh, how self-sufficient these people were. My wife's aunt and uncle, they sewed all their own clothes and they had their own chickens and they had a full garden and they would drive, down a road down for 20, 30, 40 minutes down a back highway and they would see like a pear tree or an apple tree and they would say, "Oh, we know, like we harvest that every year," and they would just get out of the car right there on the road and just grab the apples and come back. And then they had chickens and they said, "Oh, we walk down here and we fish down here in the lake. They fill it with trout and we get all of our stuff as we do all this canning, we do all these things." And it was very different. First, it kind of depressed me at first because I was like, I so not good at any of those things and I don't have
Hmm.
any of those skills. But at the same time, it was, that's kind of the extreme. And so I thought to myself, I started looking around my community and I realized that I feel like there might be a trend surging where things are becoming more localized slowly,
Hmm.
like farmers
Oh yeah,
markets are
for sure.
becoming more popular. And even on Whidbey Island, I went over to Whidbey Island a couple months ago and had dinner with my dad, and the entire south end of Whidbey Island, they've put in a bunch of those breweries, they put in a bunch of wine tasting places, and they're starting to bring back like a lot of eateries. And I would say that I think I totally agree with you. Even if you have to make some practical choices in your life to pay the bills and be part of the infrastructure, the only thing that's going to save you is having something that you can work on slowly and develop and improve over time, whether it's something like taking a woodworking class or doing martial arts. Or and I think that really it embodies what I'm trying to do with the show on some level, is to kind of bring maybe a little bit of hope, because I just feel like there's a lot of negativity about human beings lately, and maybe rightfully so, because we have done a lot of really messed up things, but
Sure.
also there is a lot of good things going on, and there are a
Hmm.
lot of people doing, like I said, martial arts classes, or creating music, or video editing, or whatever it is that you're doing, writing short stories in your free time, and it's bringing joy and value to people's lives more than people think it is. Even something like brewing a beer or cooking a dinner for somebody, uh, is essential. It's one of the essential human experiences, and it should be pursued to the fullest.
Yeah, that idea of focusing on a craft is something that is kind of a reaction against the society and culture of the 80s, 90s, and early
Yeah,
2000s. And history of human civilization is a history of action and reaction. We develop in the industrial era, and then we have reactions against that. And we have people who move back to simpler ways. We have people who develop new religions to hearken back to these self-sufficient ideals.
yeah,
And then we move forward again, and we are focused on profit and capitalism above all else. And then we see economic crashes, and people look inwards again and refocus.
yeah,
And we see that again and again throughout history. And one of the most prevalent areas to see it in, at least from my knowledge and what I study, is in art and design. You can look at art movements, and they directly reflect the values and outlying values of the people at the time.
yeah,
You see the Renaissance, then you see the reaction to the Renaissance. You see modernism, and then you see postmodernism. You see Dadaism, which was a reaction against modernism and was this concept that art can be nothing and everything, and that's fine. It doesn't have to mean anything. And this kind of reaction to what we're dissatisfied with around us and reinterpretation and refocusing is something we all do in our everyday lives.
yeah.
And it's something humans have done forever.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I
you
definitely
just have to find your place in that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would say that now I use a similar analogy that isn't as elegant as yours, but I compare it to a pendulum. The pendulum swings one
Hmm.
direction, and then people go, "Well, this is too extreme," and then it swings the other direction. And it's for me, the way I've always described it in any of my videos in the past has been the balance between order and chaos. Things become a little too structured for people, and then you yearn for like nature, and then you go out of nature for too long, and you're like, man, I really miss the comforts of having some structure, and then you go back and it just goes back and forth until you settle on some sort of happy medium. So I actually think that I say this every single time I talk to somebody, but maybe it's because my product is slowly improving as I do these interviews. I actually feel like talking to you was so enjoyable that I could do like at least 3 more episodes with you on various topics, because you're right in the vein of the things that I love talking about. So,
Yeah.
do you have anything that you want to end the show with?
Oh, I suppose if I had to sum up my conceptualization of what I've found to be most fulfilling for me, it's going to change for everybody, is pursue what you're passionate about. Whether it makes you money or not, you're going to get some satisfaction in either learning more about that topic or learning that you want nothing to do with that topic. As I've said before, knowledge and learning are something I've always valued and always will value. And if you focus on pursuing what you are passionate about, you're going to feel good and you're going to be happy. We don't all always have that luxury. Sometimes we have to work crappy jobs, or we have to deal with loved ones being sick. We have to work around the realities of life, but you find these small moments or larger moments within your reality where you can focus on what you really want to at that moment, whether it's a book or a passion project. Just allow yourself those moments to focus on something that only brings you pleasure. And some people call it meditation. I can't really make myself stop and close my eyes and focus like that. I wish that I could, but I feel the same way about reading a book or working on a new beer recipe. That's my moment of zen in the chaos of life.
That's awesome. This has been really fantastic. Stay on the line with me, and then I'll just stop recording. Thank you,
Sure,
everyone,
yeah.
for watching the show, and please, interact, subscribe, do the things that you're gonna do to let me know how I can improve it. This has been so far one of my favorite conversations. So thank you for all your support. Take care.